Assalamualaikum to all dear listeners. My name is Nur Azam Hakimi bin Sukaimi from group number 1. And as for this video, our group will explain about realism theory. Before we begin, let me introduce to our group members. Our group consists of 5 people: Muhammad Razik bin Hamzan, Nur Alia binti Muhammad Rosmai Nizam, Muhammad Zaki Ashraf bin Baharin, Muhammad Syafiq bin Sufyan, and me, Nur Azam Hakimi bin Sukaimi. And together, we will help you to understand the concept of realism. In this video, we will discuss about the background of realism, the main points, the impacts toward international relation, and we will end our presentation with a conclusion. So, let's start with an introduction.
Background of realism. Realism is a school of thought that emphasizes the competitive and conflictual side of internal relation. Realism is one of the main theoretical framework that seeks to explain state behavior. It is a theory that places state at the center of analysis and is concerned with state power and state interrelation. Next, the roots of realism are said to be found in some of realist writings, particularly Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War. Thucydides, writing over 2,000 years ago, was not a realist because internal relation theory did not exist in name form until the 20th century. Now, this is a father of realism. Hence, Montesquieu sought to develop a comprehensive international theory in the end of World War II because he believed that politics, like society in general, is governed by law with roots in human nature. Next, Kenneth was modernized internal relation theory by movie realism. Away from its approval assumption about human nature, his theoretical contribution was termed neorealism and or structural realism because he emphasized the notion of structure in his explanation. Next, the nation state usually abbreviated to state in the primary actor in international relations according to realism. Other bodies, such as individual and organization, exist, but their influence is limited.
Alright, there are four main points of realism, which is balance of power, state survival, anarchy, and human nature. The first one is balance of power. The main strategies of realism is in the management of world affairs. Balance of power can be in balance or imbalance. No state is allowed to be too powerful in the international system. The balance of power prompted the United States and Soviet Union to ally during the World War II in 1939 until 1945. The second main point is state survival. According to the Watts in 1959, the goal of maintaining a position of state power is paramount to all other considerations as long as the nation of self-help persists. Realism proposed state survival can be only realized through the security provided by a state's own military defense, such as unilateral offensive military strikes are not ruled out as a type of self-help to reach states' national interests, which is ultimately survival. An example of this is the recent United States-led invasions of Iraq. The United States claimed Saddam Hussein obtained weapons of mass destruction and was close to achieving nuclear capabilities, which was believed to be a national security threat to the United States. Hence, the United States used its military superiority to topple Saddam's regime. Next, we move to the third main point, which is anarchy. The rule of the international system are dictated by anarchy. A central assumption of the realist approach to anarchy is thus that the rule of the international system are dictated by anarchy. In this sense, anarchy is perceived as a lack of central governments to enforce rule and project states. These categorizations can be linked to the perceptions that international relations, which is cannot escape from a state of anarchy and will continue to be dangerous as a result. Such perceptions demonstrate that realists have a largely pessimistic view of the international system. In sums, all realists appear to subscribe to the belief that states are the only relevant actors in international politics, and as there is no central authority to regulate or govern nation-states, a state of anarchy exists, where conflict and war is a constant threat as each state seeks to ensure its own survival at the expense of others. Last point is human nature. According to the Weber, classical realists contend that human nature is destructive and thus cause war, while neo-realists prefer to focus on social causes of war, arguing that it is social relations among states that are responsible for conflict. Human beings are egoistic and desire power. Selfishness, desire for power, and inability to trust others lead to predictable outcomes. In this sense, classical realists appear to be arguing that due to human nature, war is to be expected at any time. Related to this point, Morgenthau would argue that all politics is a struggle for power, and that in the international arena, this struggle cannot so readily be tamed.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Nur Alhamdulillah Muhammad Rosmanizam. For the analysis on the theory, I will explain four of the realism branches, which is classical realism, new realism, offensive realism, and defensive realism. Classical realism emphasizes the reality of powers. It has the concept that human nature holds a central function as an explanatory black box which guides the behavior of individuals and states. Classical realism argues about the powers that exist in human beings because human beings are the one who makes and control the political laws. They believe human nature itself is aggressive to attack each other for its own benefits. For the neorealism, Kenneth Waltz further developed realism in his book Theory of International Politics 1979, setting out a neorealist assumption such as states are considered to be the main actors operating in a rational and utility maximizing way. Neorealism consists that states behave according to the structure of the international system. They compete among themselves over power. Besides, states cannot rely on others as it might be their biggest threat, especially in terms of military. Next, offensive realism. They argue that states are tend to competition and conflicts because they are self-interested, power maximizing, and fearful of other states. It is because to maintain national security themselves and stay away from rivals. In offensive realism, they focus mainly on great powers. In its analysis, as only great powers are in a position to move first in the international power struggles. Other than that, defensive realism. Defensive realism argue that states seek power to improve their security till fullest. They also pay attention to the potential importance of shared values by states, supporting a peaceful balance of power. Defensive realism tend to retain current power distributions, and defensive realism are not naturally aggressive and avoid relative flaws as a result of shifts in their relative position and ranking. And that's all the analysis on the realism theory.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Razif bin Azwan, and I'll be covering the impact of realism towards international relations. First, we must see the effect of realism based on its influence on foreign policy making. Realistically, a nation's foreign policy generally should account towards national interests. Clearly, aspects such as resources, threat towards security, or actions from external sources should be taken into consideration when forming a policy in regards to other nations. Nations often base their foreign policy on power calculations rather than ideational reasons, since there is no central authority to stop nations from taking advantage of one another. And also because states cannot be certain of one another's intention. As such, they can't afford to base their foreign policy on ideologies or cultural norms, since doing so would jeopardize their very existence. States serves as the main actors on the world stage. They primarily concerns with their own survival, natural national interests, or accumulation of power. Really see the world politic as a fight for dominance in the global anarchy. Their understanding of foreign policy is significantly impacted by the conduct of the international community. Besides that, realism can also cause changes in the international political sphere. A realist knows the undeniable truth that of the world's politics as a battleground of power struggle among various states and groups. For example, there exists political realism, which is a perspective on world politics that emphasizes its adversarial and conflictual elements. Essentially, it's contrasted with idealism and liberalism, which tends to emphasize more on collaboration between nations. Moreover, the emphasis on power and self-interest by realists might be problematic, since they frequently question the applicability of moral principles to relationships between nations. Um, each and every action made would influence uh, each and every actions made by the states would uh, influence other nations uh, and their future decisions. That's all for impact of realism towards international relations. I'll pass it to the next presenter to for the conclusion.
Realism theory plays an important role as for this course, international relation. Learning about realism helps you to understand better about the concept of theory of realism, since it's cover a different type of theories that brings a multiple perspective on international relation. It is necessary to learn the knowledge regarding the war history to avoid any repetition of event among countries in the international community. In the end, in order for one to fully understand the balance between power and distribution of capabilities in the international relation is by the theories stipulated by realism, and how does it takes turn of developing over the year. And perhaps this will be the end of our presentation. So I hope all of you has learned something throughout this video. Thank you.